All right, guys, we're just hooking the recording up. Thanks everyone for turning up. We're here at the Brisbane Azure User Group. If that's not what you're planning, it's not the right place for you. We are recording this event. So these Microsoft, they've recorded you. So they're super sensitive. So if you whisper, we're going to review what you're saying later. Don't worry. And we are here for August. So hopefully that's everybody's intended month. If you're an earlier month, well, you've got a bit of catching up. But welcome to August. Welcome to Azure. And before we get too far, a big thank you out there to our sponsors. So Codify and Microsoft. So without Codify, none of this pizza and beer would be available. And without Microsoft, well, you wouldn't be sitting here. So big thank you out there to our sponsors. They're awesome. They help us out every month. And we really want to make this a bit more of an interactive experience for everybody involved. That just means you all have to present, right? So that's how this works. So everybody present, and then it'll be very interactive. So we want everybody to get involved. And we've got a whole bunch of topics that great people stand up from the community and present every month. We'd love to hear from you, everybody. We also offer to put a few talks together if you just have like a short, hey, this is what I'm doing with Azure. It doesn't have to be super involved. It doesn't have to be on the latest and greatest technology. It's really about your experiences and how you can help. Okay, except for JK, it has to be the latest technology for JK. Everybody else gets a pass.
Just a quick question. Is it okay to do cloud OpenAI, Azure OpenAI to offline AI?
Yeah, as long as it's not AWS, we don't care.
Just because the focus
and GCP, it doesn't even rate, right? So,
I'm asking just because it's a little bit more focused on offline.
As long as it's Azure involved.
There you go, October.
Yeah, we'll write you down. If you're not presenting, we'll chase you. But email there. Let us know. We're not that mean, you know. Except for JK, we'll be mean to him. But everybody else, we're really not that mean. Please get involved. We'd love to hear from you. It's about the community, and it's about what the community wants to present. So JK's allowed to say he's going to do offline OpenAI. Cool.
Then to have Azure OpenAI.
Oh, there you go. How can you go wrong? I mean, I think Todd's done a whole bunch of demos where he's had some Cylon detection. That was offline, wasn't it? Maybe. I think it was. It was deployed to a.
It was hardware.
It was hardware, right? Yeah, there you go. So we've done that before. No worries. All good. We've got some job opportunities. So Dan's thankfully loaded this slide with a surprise for me.
Yeah, of course. It's not a surprise. You get it every month.
But I didn't put it in. Fair enough. Okay, let's hear it.
Absolutely. If you're looking for a new adventure, Deloitte is always interested in talented engineers. And just so you know, Deloitte, has this big reputation of being an auditor and finance and stuff, but the largest part of Deloitte's business is actually consulting. And we definitely in technology and engineer, we solve some wicked problems there. So if you're interested, you can either talk to me, you can scan that QR code or ping us at the email or online. It's really good.
It's short sell on it. Deloitte has got a bunch of really great people as well. So it's the people that make the experience.
Yeah, just make the exception for me. And I'm also just going to hand the floor very briefly to Adam, who's going to talk about opportunities at Microsoft.
This whole presentation's got off the running.
Hi team, Adam Stevenson. I've actually left Microsoft. Yeah, so I've left Microsoft and I've joined Agile Insights. So we're a boutique data and AI consulting company. So I spend all day, every day just doing AI. So the whole practice is AI. So everything from, RAG, chat through documents and doing a whole lot of automation and moving into, multimodal applications. So if you've got, consulting experience, strong Azure, and the idea of just working with enterprise customers, building AI applications all day, every day, sounds like your bag, then please reach out
And apparently you're writing code now.
all day, every day.
Oh my
God. Look, it moves fast. It is super exciting. Every month I'm looking what we were doing a few months ago and going, it's
Let's go.
let's go. And it is literally, and it's exciting to go that find like the laggards, like having worked with, cloud migrations and cloud innovation, it was, government and public sector weren't necessarily the most innovative. It's amazing seeing big complex organizations go, we need to do AI and we need to do it now. And turning up with 30 or 40 use cases going, how quick can we get all of these into production? And, what a great, it's an amazing challenge, but it literally keeps me up.
That's amazing.
Going, this is, there's so much excitement around what's possible and actually making it happen for customers.
When you're going, it's exciting and it gives you energy, right?
Yeah, so anyway, it's back. So feel free to reach out and say hi if you're interested. I'll definitely be presenting in the next couple of months.
Nice.
Some of the learnings that we've already had from delivering customer projects. So yeah,
that's exactly what we want to hear.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Adam. All right. So not a huge amount of updates. Actually, there was a huge amount, but I just cut out all the ones I was bored of. But we'll lead off with .NET because I love .NET. So Azure Functions, we now got .NET 8 in the in-process model. That's pretty cool. There's Redis extension for Azure Functions. So you can now trigger things from Redis. You can, it's great. So this one here personally triggered my interest. I'm working with a whole bunch of Java guys that are doing Spring Cloud at the moment. It's interesting to see some of this Spring Cloud stuff start to come through into Azure Container Apps. And Azure Container Apps, if you haven't seen Azure Container Apps, you probably need to. It's pretty awesome. It's almost as good as App Service. It's not. App Service is still the best. But close second, Container Apps, and Kubernetes is way last. So, no bias. Managed identity for scaling rules in Azure Container Apps. So a little bit more investment into Container Apps. It's good to see. And we've got Container App to Container App TLS. So secure communications between them. And that's oh man, I have to go all the way over here. That's number 4. So I may have stolen this image, but this one here, yeah, I didn't write that image. Key Vault certificates in Azure Container Apps. So you can, I don't know if you can feel this theme that I'm giving here. It is a little bit biased. And then just to balance it out, the best service in the world of Azure. If you're not using this one, you're not doing anything. App Service now has app configuration references on App Service. So that's pretty cool and long awaited for. JK and I were talking about this, what was it, last month, was it? We were talking about Key Vault references in App Service. Well, now you've got some configuration references that you can start to mix and match. So it's like this opens it up a little bit. So there's some more options in this place, which is good to see. Auxiliary log plan. So, most of you are using the analytics logs, I would assume. That's a pretty safe assumption. But if you've got a bunch of these logs that you just really don't care about, but you have to keep it anyway, there's a super cheap option now, which is far cheaper than any of the others.
Which is very exciting for people who stopped using it because they thought it was too expensive.
Still pretty cheap. Azure Monitor basic logs. Sorry. So just a few little improvements for Azure Monitor. Retention period 8 to 30 days. It's quality of life improvements. And so the single query. So that was that previous slide here, the basic logs in the middle there, which is a lot cheaper, but it's not as cool. So now we've got the KQL on a single table. So we're just upping the quality of life on those basic logs.
Go back one slide.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm over here if you take a photo.
Yeah, I think the society might have picked the wrong one. Save a lot of money.
Yeah, it's pretty cheap. All right, so that's that one, basic logs. And that's pretty much, there's a few other things that happened this month, but they were all really boring, so I didn't put them in. We do have a Slack channel and we do have a YouTube channel. Most of the recordings go to the YouTube channel, not all, but most of them. There's a few resources here that if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Azure, a couple of blogs, and there's someone very keen. Who was it? John Seville. Someone really. Oh no, it's not here today. But anyway, got that in there now. So anyway, tonight, without any further ado, we have Dan and Sebastian. Dan, who's going first? Did you guys find it out?
Well, it's set up already on the left.
All right, well, stand up then. So welcome, Dan. If you don't know Dan, you probably haven't been here before. So I don't know how much else I'm going to say. He's like the guru of the Azure user group. He's amazing. Welcome, Dan. And Sebastian is going to teach us how to deploy Azure OpenAI with Azure Verified Modules using Bicep and Terraform.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks. Give me 1 second to swap over the point. All right. Is that sharing all right, Bern?
Yeah, looking good.
Beautiful. Okay. All right. Clicker's working. Oop. Yeah, it is. Okay. There we go. All right. Well, thanks for coming tonight, everyone. So my talk tonight will be fairly short. I want to give plenty of room for Sebastian's talk. But basically, back in June, I actually missed this meetup in June because I was overseas in London attending the Integrate conference. And that conference is actually the largest Microsoft integration conference in the world. It's been going for about almost 10 years, I think. And they usually hold it every year in London. Sometimes they hold it in the US as well. For a couple of years, when we were all in our COVID caves, it was just an online-only conference. But generally, they get about 500 or so people attending in person, and another couple of hundred that they attend online because it's a hybrid conference. And it's so big that they get a lot of people from the Microsoft product team who comes in as speakers and various MVPs from around the world. And Microsoft often saves a lot of its announcements that are integration related for that conference. It's kind of like their build conference for integration stuff. And this year was no exception. So this talk, I'm just going to give a helicopter view and talk about some of the big announcements and stuff that came out as a result of that conference. So think of it as it's another talk like what Damien did, only just very integration focused. So when we're talking in integration, one of the big motivators for the stuff that they're developing is to try to get people off of BizTalk server. So how many people here know what BizTalk server is? A few? Okay, yeah, okay. How many people are seeing therapists because of their work? So actually, BizTalk is it was Microsoft's linchpin product for integration, and it is actually an incredible product. It's very, very powerful, but it's server based. You know, it's in that based in that world where we used to live in, right? Where you had to deploy your own servers and your own data centers and stuff. Very, very powerful product, but of course, everybody is now moving towards this modern architecture in the cloud, and Microsoft wants to get people off of server-based products because, frankly, it's a pain to maintain it. So BizTalk Server is actually built on top of SQL Server, Windows Server, and Visual Studio. And that means that anytime any one of those products comes out with a new version, then BizTalk has to update as well to be compatible with it, and trying to distribute versions of server-based products. You know, that's very, very expensive and to do. So Microsoft wants people to move to the cloud. And they've been pushing to enable that journey But it's very difficult because there's so many features in BizTalk that are difficult to implement in the cloud. You really kind of ideally need to re-architect your solutions in a modern way. But they have been closing the gaps over that time for parity. And this is, again, this conference shows a number of things that they've done to try to close those little holes that haven't been filled. Excuses that people are giving for staying on BizTalk. So that's just a list of quite a few of them, but I'll be talking through most of these in a little bit more detail. If you're worked in Azure a lot, you've probably come across Azure Integration Services, but if you're not an integration specialist, you may not know all of these services and what they do. I'll just talk through them briefly to give you that foundation. Azure Integration Services really is nothing more than a marketing label that Microsoft put over a collection of existing Azure services that you would use when you're building integration solutions. And the reason they had to do that is because you've got products out there like Toomey, like Mule, like TIBCO, and things which are selling integration and in a box, right? They sell you the whole product. When we talk about doing cloud-based integration with Microsoft, it's like, well, you've got Azure. But there's a million different services in Azure, right? So what they did is they applied this label to this small collection of services that are fundamental to building integration solutions. That's all it is. So briefly, and this isn't necessarily all that you would use, but it's the key services. I don't have to talk, I'm sure, about functions. Probably everybody knows what functions is. It's a way to run arbitrary code in a serverless manner. Data Factory is basically for when you have to move heaps of data around. It's basically your ETL, extract, transform, and load. I think I got that right. So basically, if you're familiar with SQL Server Integration Services, SSIS, this is like the cloud version of that. Service Bus, I have never seen a single solution that we built in Azure for integration that did not use Service Bus, because messaging is so key to integration architecture and how you do it. And this is really, really robust enterprise messaging capability. Event Grid is for building reactive applications that can respond to events. So event notifications. There is also not in this diagram, but event hubs as well, which is more for streaming events as well. And then you've got, of course, API management, because APIs kind of make the whole digital world go around. So your integration solution is almost certainly going to have APIs that need to be exposed and managed and all of that. And that would be APIM. And then lastly, you have logic apps, which allows you to build workflows for those more complicated or long-running processes where you need to maintain state. And also the advantage that logic apps gives you is that it has over 1,000 connectors that you can use that save you from having to write your interfaces, your code interfaces itself. And there's hardly anything you can think of in the way of a SaaS service out in the cloud, third party or Microsoft, that doesn't have a connector in logic apps. So that's big value there. And not surprisingly, most of the announcements I'm going to talk about tonight are actually in the logic apps. So before I go on, anybody have any questions about any of that? Okay, fantastic. So let's start with the logic apps area. One of the announcements was the fact that they now have support for scripting inside a logic apps workflow. Now, previously, what you've had to do is if you had a little bit of code that you wanted to execute, let's say, even if it was something very simple, like, I don't know, formatting a date or maybe compressing a file or something like that, what you had to do was implement an Azure function that did that little task, and you call the Azure function from your logic app workflow. But that's a little bit of extra overhead that you've got to do, and another thing you have to deploy. Now you actually have a shade in logic apps that can execute small bits of code, just use simple tasks for you, so it makes it a little bit more efficient. If you ever worked in BizTalk and you did BizTalk orchestrations, there was an expression shape that you could use to write little bits of code in it. Well, this is kind of the equivalent of doing that in logic apps. And it supports not only C#, but also supports PowerShell as well. And it does support .NET 8, so you can manage both legacy and modern code with that as well.
But is it limited to some, you cannot connect to different libraries?
I believe there's support here for adding importing assemblies.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so I
It's
think,
also
yes, I think it is. Now it is in public preview at the moment, so there may be some limitations with it, but you know, it's gradually going to mature. So that's a helpful thing.
It looks like a method, so it's probably pretty extensible.
The other thing is the ability to generate deployment scripts. And this is really handy because the workflows and logic apps are written in something called workflow definition language, which is really just JSON. It's a particular flavor of JSON. And it was always a bit challenging to get this embedded into your ARM templates because there was stuff in there that had to be escaped when you're kind of including it. And it could be a bit tricky. And the connectors too are really always have been very challenging when you build your connectors to then try to figure out how to migrate them from one environment to another where you have to parameterize them. So now this generation actually helps make that a lot easier for you. And you can actually parameterize your connections at the point when you're actually creating them. And it will help you quite a bit with your ARM templates. Also, if we have two, I should say we have two flavors of logic apps. We have the consumption-based model, which has been around for quite some time, and that consumption can only be built and deployed in Azure, and that's kind of pay as you go. So every action, every shape, you know, calculates a charge. But the more recent version of logic apps, it's called standard logic apps, actually works on the functions runtime, and that means it's hosted in an app service plan. So now you have more predictable costing, right? Because you're paying for that app service plan. And you can also pair it with functions that might support your logic apps. But it's surprisingly, it's only until now that they've actually enabled one of the key features that we normally have with app service plans, which is having slots, deployment slots. So this is a start towards being able to get that zero downtime deployment for logic apps. Now it is, again, it's in public preview and there's a bunch of limitations with it, but at least this feature is starting to come across with us now. Azure Integration Environment, that's been out for a little while, but they are expanding it and extending it. So when you deploy your integration solutions, one of the challenges is that because you would have logic apps and a service bus and an APIM, and maybe event creator, things like that, you have all these disparate services in Azure that are working together to build a solution. And you all know what it's like to navigate the Azure portal, right? When you're trying to see what's going on from end to end, you're going to have all these different tabs open in your browser trying to monitor it. So what the Azure Integration Environment is, it allows you to group these services together in a logical fashion. So you can basically see them together in one screen and manage it together as a full end-to-end application. It also includes a feature called business process tracking, which enables you to track what your application is doing from a functional level rather than just a technical one, right? So let's talk through that a little bit. So as far as the single pane of glass views, you can choose yourself. You define the logic for how you group these applications together. So you could choose maybe to do it, say, by environment, right? By dev, test, and prod. Or you might choose to do it based on a particular area of your business functionality. Or you might even choose, maybe even finer grained than that, to group them together based on a particular function in the functional area of your business. It's up to you how you want to do that, but that you can choose how you want to group these resources and monitor them. And it makes it so much easier to see what's going on. So that currently supports logic apps, APIM, and service bus. So we don't have event grid and stuff like that in there yet, but that may come into the picture soon, because this is all still public preview. The other thing that it gives you, as I mentioned already, was business process tracking. And this is basically where you can get your BAs even to define key sort of stages or milestones in your solutions that you want to track progress in. And then your developer, you can actually mark these things in your application to collect certain data, which then gets exposed in Azure Data Explorer at runtime. So you can actually track, say, where is my order being processed, what stage it is, how quickly, what's the time delays between ordering and actually delivering and stuff. So you can answer those questions. If you ever lived in BizTalk land before, is anybody in here done BizTalk before? And what does this sound like? Bam. Yeah, business activity monitoring. That's right. So we don't have business activity monitoring, or haven't had it in Azure yet. So this is now that stage towards being able to deliver that key functionality. And just the thing about BAM, it's a very, very powerful feature in BizTalk, and so rarely ever used the way it was meant to be used. I mean, every time I've used BAM, we've only been using it for instrumentation, but it's actually really meant to answer questions that executives would want. Yeah, so it's very powerful. The BRE, Business Rules Engine for Logic Apps. This was actually the subject of my talk. I was invited to speak at Integrate, and I did a whole session on this one. So the business rules engine, of course, when you have elaborate business rules that need to be represented, a BRE helps you do that and manage those rules independently of your application code. There's a lot of advantages of why you would want to do that. This was another gap between BizTalk Server and the cloud, because BizTalk Server came out of the box with a business rules engine in it that you could use. It was very powerful, uses forward chaining and all of that. Now we have this ability, again, in preview, available to use in Logic Apps. And the way it works is that there's a business rules composer, which curiously enough looks exactly like the business rules composer that came with BizTalk. And you basically compose your rules in there. It produces an XML file. And now in Logic Apps, we have a new artifact type along with schemas and maps called rules. And you import your rules in there. And then when you create your Logic Apps function, you might know that you have a what do they call it? A workspace template. So first it was Logic Apps, then you had Logic Apps with custom code. Now you've got Logic Apps with business rules, which is really a Logic Apps with custom code, but the custom code they include is basically all the libraries you need to manage your rules engine, all the Microsoft libraries. So plus you get this new artifact type, and you can execute your rules from within Logic Apps. So that's kind of another, closing another gap between BizTalk and Azure services.
Sorry, Dan.
Mhm.
Can I ask, is that envisioned to be used for new workloads as well, or that's just for migration, or you'd only really use that for migration?
You absolutely can use it for new workloads. Now, that's why they've given us the business rules composer as a separate executable, and you can compose your rules in there, and that generates an XML file. That XML file is exactly the same format as what you exported in BizTalk Server. So you can use it to migrate. It is a key part of migrating BizTalk, because you can take business rules exactly as they are in BizTalk, unless one key thing, in BizTalk Server, one of the rule fact types that you could use was database facts. This only supports XML and .NET base facts. So if you had database XML and .NET, is that what I said? Yeah, it's XML and .NET base facts. If you had database facts in BizTalk Server, you have to kind of change your rules a little bit to work around that. But yes, it's exactly compatible with that. So yes, the key driver, I think, for it is migration from BizTalk, but you can still develop your solutions now using that. So there's B2B and EDI in enhancement now in standard Logic Apps. I think it's been available in preview for a while. It's now GA. It has been available in consumption based Logic Apps for ages now, but in standard Logic Apps, it was I think it was only offering EDI for a while, but now you've got X12 as well support. And you generally need an integration account with that to hold things like your contracts and your agreements with your business partners. There is a new SKU now for integration account, a premium SKU, which gives you unlimited storage, because the other SKUs all have limits on how many things you can put in it. It gives you availability zone support, and it also coming soon, not there yet, DNet support as well for this premium SKU. A hybrid deployment model. This is something new as well. This is only an early access preview, but the scenario for this is that if you're thinking about deploying deploying solutions that span both the cloud and on-prem. Like say, for example, if you're doing like edge computing, that kind of stuff. So there's models that enable you to deploy those artifacts and manage them together in the cloud. And no prize. Well, yeah. Who wants to guess what the management plane is executed in? If I have an idea, it was actually on the last slide. If you read it fast enough.
There's a lot of information on that slide there.
Anybody want to guess what would be how you would tie that together from on-prem and cloud?
Huck.
There you go. Give that man a prize. Azure Arc. Yeah, that's how it's managed. So yeah, I'll go back to that slide so you can actually read it. Yeah, so that's so this is early access preview. Microsoft is really interested in hearing from you if this is something that you think you could use. But basically, it allows each of these scenarios that we talk about, where you have local processing that you have to do for compliance reasons or whatever on-prem, or when you're doing hybrid because you've got some stuff in the cloud, but you got stuff you can't move off of on-prem, or maybe you even have your artifacts dispersed in different clouds, so you can support all of those things. So there is early access preview that we're in right now. They claim that in summer, and I think that's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, so it should be soon. We should see public preview coming up with that with a few extra features in there. And if you're interested in that, you can scan that QR code and find out more. This was also an interesting. Again, this is in development. It's not available yet, but I know one of the pain points with logic apps, and one of the reasons sometimes some of my colleagues haven't wanted to develop in logic apps, is because of unit testing. How that could be a little bit difficult to do with logic apps. People are very used to writing their code-based unit tests. So what they're doing to approach this is there's two different ways that you can do unit testing. So one is a code-based approach where you could use your own, favorite libraries, NUnit or XUnit or whatever, and write your test in C#. Or you can create unit tests from a graphical user interface. So basically, once you've defined your logic apps and given a run of them, you can take the run history and then actually create assertions based on each of those steps in your logic app and generate a unit test. The underlying engine that executes that test is the same for both methods. So there's two ways you can do that. So that sounds kind of exciting. And there's a private preview available for that. So if you're really interested in that, if you're working with logic apps, definitely check that out. And there's also some templates too for Logic App Standard. I think we've had templates for consumption-based Logic App for a long time, but not so much for the standard version of it. So now that they're working on some templates, and they're actually very curious to hear from us about what kind of templates we'd like to see. So what are some common patterns that we would like to develop in Logic Apps, and basically have a kickstart to do that. So again, scan that QR code if you want to give them support, because they're developing the wireframes as we speak. So that's Logic Apps. And then I just want to mention a couple of things to do with Logic Apps and AI. So there's basically two things here. There's some improvements to help using AI to help you build Logic Apps. And then there's using Logic Apps to help you build AI solutions. So in the first one, we've got, as you might guess, Copilot, right? There's a Copilot implementation available now for the workflow assistant, that when you're in the workflow designer, you can pull up a little chat window and ask it questions about how to do things. So you might say, how do I implement this particular pattern? What's the best connector to use for this particular process? You can ask it to describe a workflow when you have one and tell you it's pretty accurate. And it tells you what it does. You can even ask it to generate a test for testing that logic app. So that's a kind of a handy Copilot type thing available. And then as far as using logic apps to build AI solutions. So how many of you have heard of the RAG model? Probably heard about that. So you would know that this large language modules are a big part of artificial intelligence, right? And they're very, very big and expensive to kind of train and build so that they work. So what the RAG model is, and I'm not an AI expert, so I'll probably get this wrong. I think Adam probably be a better person to talk about it. Essentially, you can enhance your LLMs, right, by having additional data that can be updated more frequently, and also help you in building better prompts, because everything is about the prompt generation, right? When you're talking with, talking with artificial intelligence. So that helps improve those solutions and get better and more focused results. The thing is that there's two processes that are involved in that you have to cater for and build. One is the ingestion process for ingesting all that extra data that you want to use. And every time you add that data, you've got to tokenize it. You've got to generate some embeddings. You've got to put in index search, stuff in there so that you can use things like OpenAI and Azure Search to help with that. And then once you have that stuff, when you want to actually use it and query it, the same thing, you've got to have a prompt engine, right, to give you to create the right prompt, and then have to generate embeddings and do a vector search using Azure AI, and eventually, come out with a correct and improved prompt that's going to get you the data that you need from your solution. So that's a lot to code and build on your own. What Logic Apps has done now is they've given us two new connectors, one connector for OpenAI and another connector for Azure Search, for AI search specifically. And that actually means that you can build these two processes using workflows in Logic Apps, and that helps build the solution. Again, this is all still in preview at the moment, but yeah, it's available to you to try out. So that's a lot of stuff just in Logic Apps. So briefly, I'll just cover in Azure Messaging. I think the biggest announcement that we had there that everybody was so excited about was geo replication for Service Bus, yes, for Service Bus and Event Hubs. Now, prior to this, when you replicated, when you built, HA solutions, right, with geo redundancy, it was only that you created the namespace and the structures, right, but not the data itself that went through it. Now you actually can replicate the data, the actual messages. And you have two choices of how you can do that. You can do it either synchronously or asynchronously. Now let's hope I get this in correct and don't mix them up. Okay, so if you're really concerned about not losing any data, that's paramount, then you choose the synchronous solution, which means that when you write a message on your primary queue or topic, it doesn't complete the transaction until it's copied it in the secondary as well, right? So you're guaranteed if that transaction completes, you know that you have persistence in both places. You've got your replication. But obviously there's a bit of a performance hit with that. So if performance is more important for you, then you can choose the asynchronous option, which means that the transaction will complete on the primary and it will replicate to the other one in the backend. But of course, there's always that risk, that tiny little bit of risk that if you get a failure right in between those two, you might lose something. But you have the option.
I imagine that if you use an asynchronous as well, it could also potentially process a message twice. Could it? Like synchronous would make sure that it's only ever processed once, I guess, if you wanted that.
It's a good question. I would think that it's probably built pretty resiliently for that. And one of the features that Service Bus gives you is deduplication too. So if you enable that, it would be unlikely you get the message twice, right?
Because,
but it's a good question. Yes.
Yeah, I actually think usually this is for DR scenarios.
yeah,
And you're usually looking for the service to be idempotent, so it can take the same message twice, because it's that thing where if one goes down and you are doing the failover, you may be you've got to assume that you might get the same message more than once. Mm-hmm. So I think there's probably it'd be a really cool deeper dive on how to do DR with Service Bus geo replication. If anyone who's an integration expert wants to do that, I would definitely tweet into that, because it's been super hard.
But you need to test if you shut down the whole Azure service.
Yeah, we'll shut down an Azure region just to test it. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thing that can happen.
The key thing about this is that with the failover, when it happens, it's transparent to the user. Right, so they don't have to change anything in namespace. The secondary becomes promoted to the primary. So that's actually a really good feature. And I mentioned also, it's now available in Event Hubs as well. So geo-replication in there. A couple of other things at Events Hub. There's an emulator now, which is a container supported in Windows and Linux. So you can use that for dev and test purposes. There's now full support for Kafka in that. And then also there's a schema registry, which we had before for JSON schema. That's now gone GA, but there's also in public preview now protobuf support and Afro schema support. Then in API management, we've got two new version 2 SKUs available. So this is a new implementation to the platform that's a lot more efficient. Apparently, it deploys a lot faster. I'd be curious to know, has anybody worked with it yet or done a deployment? You have. And how long does it take now?
I didn't time it.
Oh, okay. Because I know it could take up to an hour sometimes to deploy an APIM in the original one. So yeah, I'd be curious to know how fast this is now. Another really cool feature in that is that VNet integration, which was always a premium only feature, is now available in standard of the new V2 SKUs. So that's a very welcome addition. And there's more stuff that's coming in there, private link and self-hosted gateway and a few other things. So and also Workspaces is in public preview. So Workspaces allows you to isolate parts of your APIM. So previously, where if you either had a choice of centralized API management, where you had one APIM and everything in your organization was controlled in that, or if you wanted to silo it, you wanted to separate it, you could have multiple APIMs. Now what you can do is have one APIM, and you basically have federated management by Workspaces can provide that isolation for you. So that isolation handles all the kind of things, your name values and all your security controls and everything in individual workspaces. So I imagine there's some cost savings in that. And API Center, has anybody worked with API Center yet? Looked at it? So this is actually a really cool product, and it's now GA. It's gone GA, but basically this is about managing your inventory of APIs and making it more discoverable, being able to put some governance over it when you create it. So these are the kind of problems that it would solve for you. You could have basically rules about what you're allowed to publish, so you can enforce some standards that way, make it easier to identify when there's duplicate APIs and manage all of that. So that's actually a really handy product that it offers. And there's a bit of a roadmap here, but I'm not going to go into detail talking about it. We're in the middle right now on that one in terms of what's available. It can even understand breaking changes too in there, so it can warn you about those when you're deploying your APIs. Right. And I think, oh, that's it. That's funny. I had one more slide in there, but that's not a copy. That's it for my presentation. So anybody have any questions?
Any of the features from the Logic apps, would they come to the Power Automate too, or you're not aware of it?
That's a good question. I think most of the ones that I talked about are kind of enterprise type features, which you probably don't see in Power Apps, at least not yet. But it would be interesting, like something like maybe the scripting capability, you're thinking, because the underlying engine for Power Apps I think is the same as it is for Logic Apps, but obviously it's a different kind of deployment, right? Yeah. So, any other questions? Okay, thanks, Sebastian. Good for you. If you want to use the.
Yeah. I mean, plugs. We can.
Well, the new API is I've got all the customers. Like one of the ones that is currently paying, it was like 7K per previous, and they had like people on, and now they're going down to 2. So it's literally going to save them. No, so they're literally going from 80K a month in APIM.
They're going to standard.
Yeah, they're going to the, they're waiting for the, what API center, what's the workspace? The workspace is what they did was they were setting up a new API in for every division. Because they didn't want to see that.
Yes.
So, um,
All right. Is everything fine on the recording? That we have people on Teams meeting also. Yes. All right. Welcome. So then welcome everyone already. So my name is Seb. I'm from Microsoft. Originally from Germany, so I moved here to Australia 2 years ago, physically. But I started to work for Australian customers like 4 years ago. So I'm quite used to the enterprise customer world here a bit across Australia. Today's topic from my side is Azure Verified Modules. I'm going to talk a bit more about the basics around AVM. So for those of you who don't know Azure Verified Modules, so that they get a bit of better understanding, because it's not just the modules, but it's also a lot of behind the scenes in terms of contribution and support what's going on around there. As said, my name is Seb. My role is at the moment senior consultant, mainly focusing on Azure infrastructure, securing environments, enterprise environments, automation. Have a lot to do with infrastructure as code, mostly, and pretty much helping customers in migrating to the cloud, mainly Azure, not AWS. So, but I think we talked. Right, we have a couple of AWS persons who have quite some more experience than me. So a couple of questions up front. Who is aware of AVM? Who is using AVM or who knows that? Who is aware of Carmel, Common Azure Resource Module Library?
It's delicious.
That's been
Most delicious.
yeah, okay. Which is soon. All right. So who is using infrastructure as code in general for their platform deployments or application deployments? Just so I get a picture of what's going on. Good. Okay. Bicep or Terraform? Bicep? Bicep. Terraform? Good. Good to know. So from a gender perspective, I'm going to focus mainly on Bicep for now, but I have a couple of Terraform stuff as well, which I can show in the demo. But as said, let's go a bit into the basics of AVM to give you a bit of picture. So usually it starts with a problem statement with customers, what we've seen over the last, at least I have seen over the last 5, 6, 7 years, that a customer wants to use or make use of infrastructure as code when they build their Azure platform, any kind of platform, or even if it's just a workload in Azure, right? So they go onto GitHub and they have a look at, okay, what's out there in the world, but how do other people do deployments in Azure using infrastructure as code? And then usually what happens, they go either to the Terraform registry or they go to Terraform itself and they use the normal resources and start deploying their workloads. Or on the Bicep side, they use ARM templates or Bicep resources. And I'm talking about the Bicep resources, which means when you build an application or let's say a simple workload, you might end up with, let's say, 1,000 lines of code. Right? But then if you heard of the concept with modules, it's just condensed, compact, and you might end up with just, let's say, 20 lines of code, which does the same job, right? But in the end, the point of this slide is customer or anyone using infrastructure as code ends up making their deployments what they call more dry. So don't repeat yourself. So you try to duplicate. You don't want to repeat yourself in the code, and try to put in more logic. So then the customer also usually goes at, okay, what's out there in terms of infrastructure as code frameworks? How do other customers deploy their platforms? How do other customers deploy their workloads? And how do they secure? And then they usually pick a repo. Maybe it's common, maybe it's a repository from some guy who wrote a blog post who did an amazing job. It looked nice, and the customer choose that. But then the problem is there's no support. So what happens if the code is bad? What happens if after 1 year you want to update something on the code, the person's gone, or the repository is just archived or outdated? Right? So that's usually what happens, not always, but it might happen. So, and then usually what we thought internally, and also internally we kind of had not the same issue, but we had to line it a bit. So we said, let's come up with a solution and introduce like a more global Microsoft approach in terms of infrastructure as code, which comes to this mission. Why we came up with Azure Verified Modules. As I said, before Azure Verified Modules, they were common, right? We just came up with, okay, let's put out a library of resource modules for ARM templates and Bicep and put it out there so people can use it. But it was mainly maintained by Microsoft. But then we said, okay, let's make it an official mission, and let's align with internal teams. Let's align also with the Terraform product groups that align with the Bicep product groups, like with Alex Frankel and on the other side. And let's have a talk and sit together on how we can achieve that, right? So then out of that came pretty much a library, which is now called Azure Verified Modules. And what I'm going to show you on the page as well, you will see what's the current progress and how many modules we have. It's pretty much that when you use any of these modules, they are secure by design. They're well aligned to the Cloud Adoption Framework, if you heard of the Cloud Adoption Framework. They are well aligned to the well-architected framework. And it's pretty much, it should point as the source of truth when you or anyone is using Azure modules. If it's Bicep modules or Terraform modules, you just go there and can say, okay, there's support. You can raise a support ticket with Microsoft. And that's one of the pieces. So in a nutshell, if you haven't seen the slide or you haven't seen the overview of a module itself, so pretty much we try to package a module, or we consider a module as an atomic unit, which is just a package of resources. Right? If it's Terraform resource, or if it's a Bicep resource, or ARM template resource, it's just an atomic unit, which gives you a couple of options, and that's what the screen shows here. So if you take one module, for example, a storage account module, if you think about, for those of you who have worked with resources, single resources, let's say you want to deploy a storage account which has private endpoints, has a blob container, it should have certain permissions, it should have logs, maybe, and what else? Maybe it should also have diagnostic settings enabled. So you can think about probably 6 to 7 reasons you have to set up, which you end up in like 250 lines of code. But if you choose a storage account module, you just have to pass the most the required parameters, and you end up with, let's say 20 parameters, 20 lines of code. By the way, if there's a question, like if I'm too fast, just speak up. I'm going to show a demo there. You will see a bit more. Then in terms of resource modules themselves, they are not only the resource modules. So you can see here, if you look at it in these pillars, on top we have pattern modules, where you can see AKS, different versions of AKS. So pretty much everyone has heard of Azure Resource Manager, the control unit in Azure, which is responsible for deploying all the resources. Then we have domain-specific language, which, as I said, Bicep, Terraform, maybe Toomey, maybe any other languages which might come on top. And then we have certain resource modules. And based on these resource modules, we try to come up and build pattern modules, which can be another package of modules itself. Sometimes you have, let's say, solutions or workload solutions where you have built like, I don't know, Azure OpenAI in connection with an Azure API management, right? So you would build up a pattern module out of that, which is prepackaged, and you could give it to someone else and that person could use it. That's pretty much the sense of a pattern.
Just quickly.
Yeah.
One of the big differences that I don't think people realize is that by default, AVMs are both secure and resilient. Whereas if you just deploy a base resource, there's no guarantee of security, is there? Like it's designed to be easy to use if you deploy like a base Bicep resource.
Yep. That's I think I mentioned it. There's a lot
You
of
have it,
things.
yeah. But there's a big difference though, because it's secure by default instead of.
It's one of the main difference. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's one of the main differences when I mentioned at the beginning, it's secure by default, secure by design. When we say it's aligned to the well-architected framework, which means if you use normal Bicep resources out of the box or normal Terraform resources, you can set any settings, and all of them are required option, but none of them are saying that's secure by default. So it gives you all the options. You can do whatever you want. But when you use Azure Verified Modules, verified not only means verified, it also means actually you could say it should be secured, right? Things like public access is disabled by default, right? Should not always. I mean, there are often application workloads which are using public endpoints, of course, and that's something different. But other settings could be. You can see there's a lot of movement towards using Azure service with private endpoint, especially on the enterprise level, where you have to lock down everything, where all the services have to be publicly available, which means, I mean, public endpoints should be disabled when you want to use private endpoints, for example, right? You will see this in the code when I'm showing this a bit. So where does it fit in? So usually we say application workloads where you can use it. Where it makes the most sense. I would say that's not mainly true, because oftentimes what I can see, I'm working on enterprise engagements where we are building the whole platform for customer environments, also using Azure Verified Modules. Not only Azure Verified Modules, we're also using Terraform modules, right? So it's not and one only. You can also create a platform with these modules. It's pretty much it. So this slide is just about if you want to learn a bit more. I'm happy to share the slides afterwards, for those people who are making screenshots. Just wait a second. So we don't have RFID codes, but we have fancy aka.ms URLs. That's the website. I think that's easy to remember, which brings us to the current outsourced Azure Verified Modules website, because there's a lot of movement in terms of documentation, usage, and so on. And I'm going to show that in a second. Just going to the next slide. So now it's the demo part. So the session was announced with, okay, let's deploy Azure OpenAI Azure Verified Modules, right? So maybe some people are here to actually, which are interested in that. So I'm not focusing on this whole point. I'm just putting in a pitch, which is also stolen, by the way, but it's stolen from a colleague. Some of you might have seen this, because that's the current API management service integration with Azure OpenAI. If you load balancing and scaling, when you use Azure OpenAI on a multi-region or enterprise level, that's usually the start to what customers have. We're just focusing on this piece here, yeah. But this one on this doesn't matter, which has a private link attached to which network, right? Which is the starting point. What you can use it for later if you want API management. But just think about this piece, which I'm going to show you now on the code. So let me just switch. So just a set aka.ms/avm brings you to the official Azure Verified Modules website. And a couple of points here. As I mentioned, what I wanted to point out is you can see how many and what kind of modules we have. Right on the left side, we have the indexes. We have the certain specifications, contribution, and so on. So if we quickly go to the module indexes, just want to show the current state what we have. So we have At the moment, 135. So this is live. So when this is completely connected with GitHub repositories in the background and Bicep registry and Terraform registry. So everything what you can see here is live. So if there's a pull request at the moment going on where a person developed a new version of a module, the number gets up, maybe down, happens as well. Then we have 10 pattern models on the Bicep side and on the Terraform side. We have, I know, round about, I think 60 or 80 modules. I mean, you can see proposed some 92 modules for Terraform, right? So there's a lot of work ongoing on the Terraform side as well. And if someone of you is interested to contribute or has an idea, feel free. In terms of contribution, you go to the page and you can see we have quite some sophisticated and well thought processes and overviews when it comes to, oh, where do I actually go to when I want to contribute, right? So we have process overviews and everything. Also in terms of FAQs and so on, so Bicep or Terraform, or even if you have ideas about bringing in Pulumi, something around that, right? All right. Back to the Bicep side. Yeah. So, for example, if you click on one of the published ones, you see the huge list of resources themselves. You see the naming. And here's one of the points I mentioned in the beginning. When you remember the problem statement page, each of the modules you can see here has a dedicated owner behind it. With these owners, these are Microsoft full-time employees. So around the world, it's not just Australia. And you can see, so you have face and a name behind every module. So if there's support required, not only for Microsoft support. So if you, let's say you're going to use these Azure Verified Modules in your enterprise, whatever, just go to Microsoft support, raise a support ticket, right? It's supported. And then usually these requests land with us. Yes. And then if we, let's say, go to one of the modules, let's say, for those of you who've worked with OpenAI, it's under the cognitive service account resource module, right? And if you click on it, it just brings you directly to the official README page on GitHub. As you can see, which is on the Bicep registry modules page, right? Okay, let me switch to Visual Studio Code just in terms of time, right? So what I'm gonna do is, so for those of you who haven't worked with Azure Verified Modules, I would like to give you a quick rundown of basics, how to use an Azure Verified Module. First of all, I recommend installing the Bicep extension in your Visual Studio Code. That's pretty much the only thing you need. And then what you could potentially do, you could clone the Bicep registry modules page where you have access to the pure code of all of the Bicep modules, right? I'm going to show you the Terraform way as well after this one. So once you have the Bicep extension installed, I'll wait a second for the screenshots. So really simple examples. What I was trying to explain. So usually you end up, who's familiar with Bicep? Just a moment. Right, so you know, that's what I meant with reasons, right? So let's say you want to deploy a storage account which has private endpoints. So you know, you need a storage account. Upfront, you need a virtual network where you put the storage account and the private endpoints into. If you want to use private endpoints, you should. You don't have to, but you should use private DNS zone, right? You should link the private DNS zone to your VNet for the resolution, and then all these different things. So if you, so this is a prepared Bicep file, right? You can see I'm going to use managed identity, which is not necessarily required for now, but it's usually required in terms of when you want to access a keyword or something. But here is the private DNS zone, then the virtual network, and then the DNS zone link, right? So how this looks like is pretty much here. So I just prepared these kind of, let's say, dependencies that are already deployed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy the do-it-yourself approach, I call it, right? So it's a storage account itself, right? With the resource, then a bit of role assignment so that I actually have access on the storage account. Then the private endpoint itself for the storage account, and then the DNS zone group into it, right? And then you can see as last step comes actually into the AVM approach. So to be honest, I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to comment it out. Right. I could also just delete it. So I'm going to scroll down to the AVM approach. So everything what it just saw, so the integration of private endpoints, the role assignments, everything is just packed into one module. Right? So you just take the storage account module and that's pretty much it. Right. So if I'm just go ahead in the deployment just to show that it's actually really working, so that not I'm just showing some code. So let me just deploy that. That was a resource group I just showed you. So let me just go ahead and just wait a second, maybe 5 seconds. Sometimes it takes me longer.
Seb, just quickly, if you go back to your code for a second.
Yeah.
Did you want to just explain to us what that 114 line is doing with the BR public?
Can you make it slightly bigger?
Yes. Yep. So here.
See that BR public colon? That doesn't look like a regular. Yeah.
It would be the next step I would like to show when I'm
Okay.
now deploying the OpenAI module. But it's pretty much BR stands for the Bicep registry, right? And public means the official public Bicep registry, which is you remember the GitHub page I showed you before? It's like where the code is sitting, pretty much what I have cloned here on the side. So you can see all the main Bicep file, the whole module itself package is in here. But you have to think about once a module actually gets developed, tested, and then published, it gets published in a container registry. Well, that's not a container registry, but it's a registry where you then VS Code is just accessing. It's pretty much like a URL reference. You want to show that, and I'm creating the OpenAI. You can see a bit more behind the scenes. Okay. It's more interesting. I just wanted to run down, make the basics that people understand the difference between resources and the module itself. So you can see just running through. If I'm switching back to the poll, we should slowly start to see the storage account with the private endpoints, right? They're coming from the module. So with the secure by default parameters, what we talked about, I'm going to show that on the Azure OpenAI module deployment. But pretty much, if you just go here, just let's double check on the networking side that public is disabled, right? We have private endpoints set up, and that's pretty much it, right? This should be done in 15 seconds, but while this is running, let's just keep going with the OpenAI module. And Wayne was it, right?
Yes.
Yes. So that's all right. In your situation, well, let's say just start from the scratch with nothing. Let's say I want to use a module. So I just created, so this is an empty file. And I just set in Azure VS Code, I set it to Bicep so that it recognizes what I'm typing. So the Bicep extension is pretty much catching up. So I say Azure OpenAI G, and then this is the Bicep extension now kicking in. You can see it says, it gives me a couple of suggestions, which is BR public. I just click on it. And then you can see it gives you all the AVM modules already front. So for those of you who have worked with that, might remember that there were some official Bicep registry modules before. They now vanished because everything just got consumed by AVM. But pretty much what you say, I want to deploy a storage account, right? You just type in and you find it, right? So just, let's say this one, and you can also just choose the latest versions, right? But let's just go back and go with OpenAI. So again, as I said, OpenAI is kind of the cognitive service. So we take cognitive service account, take the latest version, and then just say equals, and then depending if you're Mac or Windows, it's just a control space, and it gives me required property. So which says, okay, that's the only thing you have to provide for the module in order to have it deployed successfully. But I don't have to put in the whole piece of resource and put all the required parameters, or you actually have to figure out what kind of parameters you have to use. So let me just type in a couple of, that's the deployment name, 3, and then let's just put in a name. Just give it a random number. And then the same here, control space. And that's the user-defined types, which are defined in the module themselves. So these are controlled by the developer of the module, so we can put them in. So which I should show that in the code, but I'm going to show it on the README file. So I'm going to not use AI service, I'm going to use OpenAI, right? And then if I just would shoot this, it would deploy, right? But I would like to show you the README. So in VS Code, if you hover over your module in itself, you can just go to view documentation. You can do this. But for those of you who remember ARM, I think it was control 12. I thought it shows you the ARM template, but it already shows you the Bicep. So as you see, I just hovered over the Bicep reference, and I just pressed F12, and it shows you the whole AVM module completely. So you can see it's 709 or 708 lines of code with the whole module development. Yeah, whole module. So you can see a couple of the parameters, and you can see if we go to the core resource itself, let's say cognitive service, you can see there's quite some stuff built in terms of parameterization, logic around when network access is set and what kind of settings it should use. Encryption in terms of when using customer managed key, platform managed key. So this, you can see there's a lot of logic built in, which brings you the beauty of using that module, because you don't have to take care of it. But if you would not use modules, you would have to code that. Right? All right, closing this, going back to the module itself. Let's have a click on the documentation, which brings you back to the Bicep registry modules page, which is, as I said, the backend behind the public Bicep registry, where all the modules are stored. So you can see in here, if you scroll through it, it has a really nice defined README, and everything that you can see is pretty much auto-generated. So every time someone updates the version of a module, like the resource provider, or introduces new parameters, or just adds an output, the AVM framework, which is also known or ported over from the Karma framework, takes care of that. Because what I maybe forgot to mention is, and I don't have a screenshot for that, but you can see when we go to the actions. Who's familiar with GitHub Actions? Workflows? Okay, good. Just here. So if you look at the Actions tab, for those of you interested, you can see there are quite a lot workflows going on for pretty much every module, right? And if we, let's say, go to cognitive service, and click off. Let's see. So I hope you can see that. Let me see if I can increase it a bit. I think there's also a zoom option. Zoom option. Yeah. Yeah. So what happens here is pretty much we have a couple of static validation tests. So for those of you who know PSU, Bernie's nice little framework is integrated, which runs under see here. So there's a bit of static testing in terms of is the naming of the resource right? Is the naming convention applied? Is there no leftovers in the folder? So if developer makes a pull request, are there no leftovers? Are the files fine? Is there no is everything secure? Are there no spam in the folders? Then PS rule gets applied onto the corresponding resource providers of each module. And then you can see every version or every example or end-to-end test of that particular module, let's say OpenAI, gets actually really deployed. And that's the pinpoint of where Carmel came in and also IBM. We have evidence for everyone who's using the modules that they're actually really working, but not just codes on the repository. It's really working, and you can completely test it yourself, right? You just go ahead and clone the whole repository and use it in your own environment. It just works right away, right? So by the way, let me just kick that off. So we can, yeah. So let's kick that off. So going back to the code, what I would like to do, actually, are there any questions? And just a quick time check with Dan. Dan, are we good with time? I think I need 5 to 10 more minutes. Just so that people know that it's not going to take that long anymore. Yeah. I would like to deploy this, but I think it's a better approach if I just show you the examples back on the page. So if I go back to the documentation from here, it's closing this one. So you can see we have a couple of usage examples. So the current version, you can see we deploying or have a couple of end-to-end tests in terms of speech service, using customer managed keys, and then also WAF alignment example of using cognitive services. But if I quickly just move to my branch, because I was just working with the teams on a couple of additions, you should see a couple of more examples in terms of, let's say, AI service with deployments with private endpoints, but also OpenAI with private endpoints. Pretty much that's what I wanted to show. So instead of just going to the module itself and figuring out actually how to deploy what, so I just go to the documentation page. I click on one of the examples, make copy and paste, right? Go back to my code, remove that stuff here, and just put it back in, right? So the only thing I have to replace, and of course a couple of more parameters, is the version. And then I could keep that as it is. Of course, you could, let's say, change the model use, GPT-4, Mini, Turbo, whatever. Keep in consideration that not all modules are available in all regions at the moment. Change capacities and so on. And then you could come in with the private DNS resource IDs, right? Which now here's the point. There are dependency resources you usually either have to be in place or you have to create them before, right? But in terms of if you want to deploy and test it yourself, it's much easier just to clone the repositories and go to the folder itself themselves. You know what I'm just doing. Go to the tests, end-to-end tests, and you can see these tests are here. And what I meant with the private DNS zone on the VNet, what's necessary, is usually available or should be available in an enterprise environment. Usually, when we're talking about Azure landing zones where workloads get deployed into, or even if it's not Azure landing zones, maybe it's another environment, you usually have a VNet available, right, where you can deploy your services into. But if you want to do it yourself, you go ahead here and you can see there are dependencies which you can deploy. And then you pretty much do the same what I'm just doing, right? And that's the test example what I just did. All right, good. Let's have a quick look at the GitHub services, GitHub action, which is running. So why I kicked this off, I just wanted to show you, I don't want to deploy it from my VS Code because it's actually much more fancy to show it on GitHub Actions because it runs at the same time. So you can see if I click on one of them, it's actually really doing a deployment. Right, so it's pretty much the same if I would have done it in my VS Code, right? But it's working simultaneously for all of these tests. And where it's going to be deployed is pretty much in our subscription, and it should pop up in, I think, in a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds. All right, give it a time. I could show you the Terraform way, at least the Terraform registry side where we have the AVM modules, and then I would stop because I think it's a bit late already. Are people interested in the Terraform side, AVMs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly show that. So while this is running, so the Terraform side, you pretty much just go. You have one way. You go to the official Terraform registry, and you just type in AVM. And it shows you all the currently available AVM modules on Terraform side, right? So for some reason, and I just checked this with the team, there should be actually more modules available when I look for them, because if you go back to the Azure Verified Modules page and click on Terraform, you can see there are 43 available, which should all of them in Terraform registry, right? When I did the search this morning on the Terraform registry, I had 42, but I don't know, for some reason, it's just 28 this evening. You know, I don't know what's going on with HashiCorp, but we have an open ticket with them. I think it's just an issue on the search side. But the point here is, if I'm going to, I should be able to get to cognitive services as well. No? So if I can't find it here, so let me just trigger it. Right. So it is there. All the modules are there. They're just not showing up in the search. Okay. So, and this would be the Terraform one. So it's pretty much, it's not the same interface, right? Because Terraform, the registry has its own interface, but the representation of the README file behind it is pretty much the same, right? So it gives you the inputs you can take and select, the outputs, and also the README, and it also forwards you directly to the source code. You can take the examples from here. If you want to do it the Terraform way, it gives you the example. You just copy paste the code, Terraform apply, and that's it. Okay. Right. So that's a Terraform way. If you want to see a test deployment, so you go to one of the repositories, and also the same way here, actions, right? So you just go ahead and kick off one of the end-to-end tests, which you can do if you're one of our contributors. And then you just go ahead and kick them off. But I just did this 3 days ago, by the way. And this looks a bit different because, you know, Terraform is just doing a different job in terms of its state files. So you can see in here, we just have 3 examples with customer managed key, default, also private endpoint. And what you can see in here is pretty much not the same, but in a Terraform way, it does a Terraform plan for everything. And then what happens, it just destroys it afterwards. And that's pretty much the end-to-end deployment test, which gives you the proof that the module is working, right? All right, so let's have a quick check on the cognitive service side, how far we are here. Right, so they're popping up here at the same time. And you can see it's building the dependency services and so on. And then also if I go to the OpenAI service, it should already be done. See, to just conclude the topic for today, it should be Azure OpenAI with private endpoints enabled. Right. Yep, that's it. Which is, for those of you who have worked with Azure OpenAI and private endpoints, not easy bread and butter to get this actually running. But there you go. If you want it, it's packaged and easy to go. All right, let me go back to the slides just for the last slide and we can wrap up.
Sorry, question.
Yes.
Is it limited only to Azure RM or does it use Azure AD provider or other providers?
On the Terraform side?
Yeah, I'm coming from Terraform background.
On the Terraform side, it's not only limited to Azure RM. So we have a lot of modules which are using Azure API. We also can see that I think there was a big breaking change, Azure API version 2 podcast, which is cool going on, I guess. Not completely into it. But I think if not all of the modules are using Azure API, but some of them, you probably know the reasons for it is because of maybe you want to use private features, right? Or you want to have interoperability with other services. Yes, so the main point on the Terraform side is to make the modules as flexible and as adaptive as possible, which often means we switched already to the Azure API provider, which are more flexible in terms of versioning than the Azure provider.
Then just another question. Does it give you a idea of what the least privilege would be for the SVN or the user running these modules? Is there an easy way to understand, does it just need contributor, or is there certain, when you're targeting certain things, does it need a special permission?
Yeah, you go back to the secure by default topic. So on the Terraform side, I think if Matt would watch the session, he would blame me for that. But on the Bicep side, I can definitely show you that in terms of secure by design, what we have is in terms of RBAC, what you mean, the default permissions. So we have, if I just go into the code quickly, so you can see pretty much in every module, and I think on the Terraform side it's as well, but in a different form. If we scroll down to the built-in role names, so you can see for each of the services, I mean, we're talking about owner, contributor, reader, which are the main permissions in our back. But every module has its own set of built-in role names, which are only usable for that specific resource provider of that module, right? So it gives you quite a good guardrail set of roles you can only use with this. But in terms of least privilege, I mean, least privilege would mean usually contributor, right? Owner is too highly privileged.
Yeah, I think that, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the question was, is there documentation to say if you deploy this module, what permissions does the pipeline need?
Yeah,
Was that the question?
Typically, say if it's using Azure AD provider, there's some pretty privileged intro roles that really shouldn't be given to SVNs.
Yeah.
So kind of just understanding, what permissions. Basically, yeah.
It's a good question. I don't. Yeah.
Unless other than just trying to run it and you run into an issue and then
I think
slowly add permissions.
Something worthwhile. Just logging on the AVM repo would be my suggestion, because I don't think there's probably visibility about that yet. But it's a great question. I think probably for the most part, a lot of the modules that are as part of AVM is primarily around the core Azure resources, so it doesn't really touch Entra so much. So I think for the most part, you'll probably be fine for those things. But I think it's worthwhile dropping an issue on the repo and asking about it anyway, because if you're asking about it, maybe other customers have questions too around that. And I don't think there's any documentation for it.
I think like an Azure example of it, right, is if you're to assign a role, like
registrations.
A role assignment, right? That's not a normal contributor permission.
Yes, that's right.
So it'd be helpful if, other than if you look through the code and you see, oh, it's got a role assignment. Now I need to elevate or give it a special action.
Yeah.
For example, Azure SQL managed identity.
Yeah. That's a directory reader.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But
really want to drill down to it, you can just, when the Azure errors work for you, you can just keep deploying it until it gives you the mission you need, and
yes.
it works.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Where usually the Azure docs should help you in that perspective when you look at prerequisites, but I know what you mean. It's not oftentimes that obvious what you need, right? But it's actually a good point, very good question that we should include that's which says make sure you have these permissions in order to deploy the service itself, right? I mean, but also, I mean, your question was also more specific on the Entra ID provider, right, on the Terraform side, which is also quite complex in itself. Right? Okay. I hope that was a bit informative for those who have never heard of AVM. There's much more. I just wanted to touch base like the basics around it, especially on the contribution side. So if you're interested to look into it, even have ideas, we're open for contributors who want to support, because your face will be listed on the GitHub repository as well if you're a contributor, so which is good. But it also might help you internally in wherever enterprise you're working in. Right? All right, so
I just have just two little tags on there as well.
Yeah.
It's not there, but there's a Bicep community call monthly. So I guess for people that are interested in Bicep, AVM, the AVM team are on there often every month. So that's a good update point for the Bicep folks. But there's also a quarterly AVM community call now as well, isn't there? So
yes.
That's also worthwhile tagging along to, which obviously is Bicep and Terraform.
Right. See, Bernie already knows more than me in the meantime, but I'm just busy with developing modules. Yeah, as said, don't forget, PS Rule is completely sucked up into AVM. So thanks for that, Benny, and your team. And for those of you who are interested in the community call, which happens every week for AVM, but also the Bicep community call for those of you who are probably already attending it. Yes, we are pretty much present everywhere because we want to spread the knowledge. All right, in this sense, thanks for listening and thank you.
Thank you. Sebastian, that was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Those who come to the group, we really appreciate our speakers. So thank you very much for doing it. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. So we do next month. We've got a great presenter, Bronwyn Zande, and I don't know if any of you, some of you, I'm sure, have heard her speak before, but she is awesome. She's a Microsoft MVP and a regional director, and runs her own company. Trying to remember the name of it now. Soul Solution. That's what it is. But anyway, yeah, absolutely great topic coming up next month. And then the month after that, we have Wayne, who's gonna speak as well. So we still have openings for November and December. And as Damien said at the beginning, it doesn't have to be a great big topic. If you want to talk for 10 minutes on something, we'll get you in. So awesome. If I could just ask you, if you brought a bottle or in with you in here, if you could take it out with you, that would help us out a lot with cleaning up. And everybody have a